Okay, just making sure that's coming through again.
Yep, looks good.
All right. Well, I guess let's start again with kind of the understanding. Um, again, these are these responses. We've had the RFP responses for about a week. We're certainly looking at these 700 plus page documents and you know, a lot of maps and stuff to work through, and looking for questions to provide back to the vendors, hopefully, and get a little more clarification. But certainly, the understanding here, these are RFPs, not bids, and we certainly want to use them to try and reach the best decision for Richland County. What works best. Sometimes what works best can appear to be a little more expensive. Sometimes you know, they're certainly not all the same design. They use separate equipment, but they also use different designs. And so we got to look at the system design and see what you want to purchase or what supports your needs, and then and see if how the equipment's configured to make sure we're reaching all the goals. And so we'll look at the system. We'll look at the support of the system, you know, the vendors themselves, how well they support your community. The operational costs is part of the evaluation. We're working to finalize our evaluation report, and you're going to see some of the slides that are in the report or from the report. And we've got a working document right now, and ultimately we're trying to get to having enough questions answered, having the county made enough decisions that we can go through a scoring process against these proposals and see which one comes out on top for the county, and if that's the direction you choose to use. So we'll take a look here. This first slide, again, I'll just briefly through this slide in there because wanted to make sure everybody had the understanding of where we're at today. You know, we've got the two repeaters operating independently from each other, from each of the sites, I guess. And then the county's using about 5 to 6 sites to try and cover the county area. So that's what we're looking to improve upon. You've got some existing tower sites. We've definitely got some challenges in the dispatch center with the radio consoles that need to get replaced too. So the RFP itself, again, the baseline RFP request, the primary request, as we'll see it laid out on some of the slides here, was to provide coverage, public safety coverage. Of course, coverage is king in a lot of these designs. What we're trying to do is make sure that that we have the public safety level of reliability. So we want to make sure the system itself is designed to a highly reliable coverage footprint. So we anticipate the vendors building in a lot of losses, we call it, or a lot of scenarios to make sure that that radio can operate under extreme conditions. They take into account all the foliage and other factors that impact radio signals. But along with that, we have provided them the coverage areas that we anticipate that the system will blanket, and we anticipate that the system will meet 95% of in their design scenarios. It will meet 95% of that coverage area, and we can't too much dictate where the 5% falls, the 5% that doesn't work. But mathematically, the 95% is the public safety standard that we're trying to achieve. So in our request itself, we we identified both the county border and the county border plus 1 mile as two of those coverage areas. Within the county border, we requested that the portable radio operates at those public safety standards within a residential building. And so as well, when you place that public safety design level on the vendors, you're anticipating a portable radio that's operated at the hip of a user with a speaker mic. So those would be an additional impact that they would have to take into account as well. So we've got that as our main focus for kind of identifying how well the system will perform is that in-building public safety radio operation. And again, in residential building, we do have a higher standard called out for the city of Richland Center, which is has more industrial buildings, but each of the vendors have achieved that using a local site, which is how vendors tend to support higher levels of coverage. So, but we've got the county border with in-building operation, and then we've got the county border plus 1 mile for portable on the street. And again, if we're reaching the in-building coverage of the county border with that additional signal level for penetrating buildings, we usually have no trouble reaching the county border plus 1 mile for a radio that's outside of a building area. So those are our key requests and in the RFP. And then we also provided some alternate requests for coverage, specifically giving the vendor the ability to offer us alternate proposals that did not impact the reliability level of the coverage design, but did show us a decrease in the coverage area if within that alternate, it also showed us a savings for tower sites, which would be impactful to the budget of the projects. So those will be provided. You'll see those as the alternates we have coming up in some of these additional slides. One of the other areas in the RFP that we kind of formalized and laid out as some alternates to help give us an understanding of and some decision points for the county is we laid out the initial design requirement of having 4 channels in operation, so doubling the capacity of the system for the users, and then how those would be used. It would be determined by you folks down the road, but we've got that understanding of 4 channels instead of 2. We certainly want all the systems to operate in a simulcast operation, so they're all working together, making sure they're capturing the subscriber audio together, and then also broadcasting out to the subscribers together. So that's your voted simulcast network. These systems are much more of a computer network, so there's a big piece of the system as well in the network configuration. But certainly other factors are built into the request for making sure the system is very robust, very reliable, trying to eliminate single points of failure in the designs. So sometimes that's done by using multiple pieces of equipment, main backup equipment. Other times it's used by doing design processes that give you some reliability or some alternate paths for signal levels or something to make sure that we've got the safety of having a failure within the system that can then be corrected before it really impacts the actual users of the system. So within our alternates, we asked them to identify even increasing the channel from 4 to 5, hopefully giving us an understanding of what it costs to have a channel associated with each of the sites. And I've got a little bit of a budgetary breakdown understanding that I think holds true from what I can tell so far about what that might look like. And we talked a little bit about the changing areas, but ultimately that's a savings of tower sites, which also can impact your operational costs. So the county received 2 responses from 2 local vendors. Counties familiar with have supported other systems in the county. Baycom, the Motorola Solutions dealer, and General Communication, the local Harris Tate communications dealer. So we've got those 2 main responses. They've used the Motorola equipment or the Tate equipment in the designs of these systems, and we'll show you some of those pieces in the additional slides here. They both identified the ongoing support costs of the system. We've got within our report, I don't have any slides on it today. We've got the ongoing maintenance support of the radio system itself, potential ongoing maintenance support of subscriber equipment. So if the county chooses to enter into a contract to support the system, you've got an understanding of both of those things through a 10-year period. Each identified similar timelines for implementing the system itself, but essentially you're looking at probably anywhere from 18 to 24 months. With these systems, the key thing is civils, getting towers ready. Sometimes if you do have to construct some new sites, which we do have in these proposals, that can be the long piece in the process, getting through regulatory and getting approval to actually build towers. So the radio vendors themselves tend to kind of do a little bit of work in these projects up front, and then wait for some of the civils to get completed, and then come in and actually do the bulk of their work. But they get the equipment ready, they get the system staged, and then they're just looking for the civils to be completed so they can finish up their process. So they're not, the timeline's not solely based on their work. And again, we've got primary and alternate proposals from these vendors. And so in the evaluation report, we're ultimately evaluating 5 different designs and making comparisons to those designs. The other thing I think I didn't mention earlier, keep in mind, these are what we consider paper designs. So the vendors have gone out, they've used their computer modeling software to build these designs based on what they feel are the best locations. And so it's not to say that sites don't change. They certainly do. It's probably less of a norm that you would use the exact sites that they propose. So that's due to a lot of factors. Some within the vendor's control. Sometimes the counties have chosen to make design changes because they want to highlight a concern that the vendors weren't aware of, and then the vendors maybe provide them a different solution, and they sign off on the impact of that change. So here's our main responses. Again, as you look at the vertical columns here, you see each of the responses identified by either primary or alternate. And keep in mind, when you look at the primaries, these are the designs that have met our main goals that we laid out in the RFP. So you certainly could move forward with just these designs, but certainly these are the two that that meet all the criteria that we've laid out. Whereas the alternate designs, you really have to account for what that design changed and how that impacted, whether that was just they reduced the number of channels, or they reduced the coverage footprint. And so really understanding what the change is. But certainly, if you were to look at the budgetary or the numbers on these, you definitely see a difference in the designs, the various designs. Now, keep in mind, or I guess food for thought here, as I looked at them, to me, it looked like both vendors kind of put together a main design and then began to shrink the sites off of that main design, but still kind of hold on to that core design. As you can see in that second row down there, you'll see some of the sites identified as transmit and receive, whereas other sites are identified as receive only. And a lot of times, due to the fact that a portable radio has less of an ability to talk to a repeater than the repeater has the ability to talk to it, based on antennas and heights and power capabilities. So. These are a couple of the coverage maps. These are the primary coverage maps for the two primary site proposals. Again, these are the talk-in coverage. So these would be these would show probably the worst case scenario. Again, talk out is better on the system. On the left is the Baycom map identifying their 13 sites. That's kind of how you can understand that proposal. Again, this is inbound coverage as if you were inside of a building, a residential building, and how well it would cover the locations of the county. Again, keep in mind, even though they're showing you the red boundary, which is 1 mile outside, essentially their 95% requirement is inside that blue boundary there. So they've identified that they can cover 95% of that area using this design in building residential operation. And then, of course, as you can see on the right-hand side, the GenCom map, it actually calls out 95.6. So they've achieved that level with their design inside that purple boundary. We do have maps that show the higher coverage level in Richland Center. Unfortunately, they didn't really shrink it into the actual border of the center itself. So again, might be a question we ask for. It doesn't appear that there's any white dots in either one, or red dots in the other map inside that boundary. But if we wanted to get a closer look at it, we might ask for them to provide clarification. So these next set of maps are the, again, same design, primary design provided by the vendors, same layout, Baycom on the left, GenCom on the right, and slightly better image as you look at them, because this is portable on the street coverage. So 8 dB is the level we use inside of a building as a loss factor. And so these maps would show an 8 dB improvement over the previous maps. And if you kind of flash between them, you can see some of the areas, well, white on the left would indicate the areas that do not have coverage, and red or yellow on the right would indicate those areas as well. A little harder to see some of those areas inside the color. Again, these are 95% quality signal levels. So it's not to say there's no coverage in those areas. It's just to say that they haven't met the standard that we're asking for. So keep that in mind as you look at any of the images within either one of these proposals, that they have to meet a certain criteria level for public safety. And then we've got, whoops, Oh, these third set of maps, these are two of the alternates. The alternate on the right, the GenCom alternate is their, I think it's their 7-site design. Or- Yes, I think it's the alternate for Baycom is their 8-site design, and as you can see, you start to see more areas of the county. Again, these both of these maps represent portable indoor coverage. So again, we would be concerned with the blue boundaries, purple boundaries, and we see that these compared to the initial maps start to show more areas of failing to meet the 95% coverage levels. A little difficult to see in a PowerPoint presentation, so I apologize, but I wanted to throw those up there and kind of give you an understanding of how to look at these images. This slide, real quickly, is just to identify kind of the sites that they each of the vendors chose to use. Both of them have these sites that are highlighted in blue are lease sites that the county currently has leases with, and so they chose to kind of use these sites as I think they felt they were favorable to likely being used in relocating new equipment on. And then of course the sites highlighted in green are called Greenfield Sites. Those are considered towers that or sites that have no towers today, and they would be asking the county to build a tower location in that area. So certainly a greenfield site can have a lease to it. It depends on its county purchases land or chooses to lease land from an existing property owner, or maybe you have a municipality that has cover or has property in the area. Normally, when we look at greenfield sites in designs, we say as a general rule of thumb is the site could move within about a mile or so of the location that they've pinned on the map without greatly impacting the coverage or changing the coverage that the vendor's shown us. But certainly any coverage or any site movement can also be reevaluated and to how it improves or changes the coverage footprint, and it will change the coverage footprint to some extent. So, but yeah, these represent the sites that they chose to use, and again, we've got the different designs stemming from 13 sites down to 6 sites. This slide just wanted to kind of highlight a big piece of these radio systems is the network, the connectivity between the sites. It's needed in order for them to perform the simulcast and voting operation that they do and make blanket the coverage of the county. As we look at this, I focus on the second row. The big difference there, we use the term hops to identify the sites that are connected with both with two actual links to 2 different other sites. This gives redundancy at that site, which means we could lose one of the hops and the system would still operate without interruption. And give the vendor time to come out and repair the hop and get it back up to having the redundancy at that location. But further down is the term spurs, and spurs in the design are just a single link to a tower site. They've been either unable to make 2 links to it, or they feel like providing a spur makes more sense or is a cost savings. They certainly can provide the spur with some type of redundancy in equipment hardware, and that's where you see the term hot standby. But it does not have the robustness of having two different connections to it, so that it can become isolated. A lot of times spurs tend to get used in receive only sites because the system can maybe or the user can afford to lose some of the coverage for a short period of time in the receive site, as opposed to a site that's transmit and receive. And certainly there are some key sites that just have to have the reliability of connection because they perform some duties in the system. This slide here touches on paging. As you look at the different rows, I would maybe point out the second row and as identifying the fact that the vendors tend to paging being a VHF analog channel and a pager device being more difficult to reach. The vendors tend to put paging transmitters at all the sites, even if they are just a receive site for the system itself, just to give themselves a little more robustness to reach pagers inside of buildings. We're asking as well for that indoor coverage with the paging request of the primary designs. So as you can see, we've reached that, but some of the sites or some of the alternate proposals drop below the 95% coverage threshold or coverage area threshold. This slide pulls out some of the information about the consoles proposed. Again, Motorola consoles proposed by Baycom. The MCC 7500 series has been around for quite some time, replaced the current console you have, the Centricom Gold Elite. And so these are much more kind of IP-based consoles. Both of these products, GenCom using a company called Mindshare, has been in the industry for quite a few years as well, and builds a network console. But these are much more IP-based than even your current consoles. Gone are the large rack systems in the back room that used to provide all the cards that operated the control bases, and we would rely on these consoles with either of these vendors to be networked into the main radio system, and that would be their primary path for operating the main channels, the paging, the highway channels, anything that is part of the main radio network. They can have remote smaller devices, very single rack devices that allow them to operate some control stations as well. But everything is networked together and really local control or a small control of the local radio device to operate. And a lot of their audio devices are all USB related for their headsets and mic jacks and such. So. Separate from the main primary radio system, the main channels for operation, we've also got the secondary systems, highway being one of the main pieces. Again, it's kind of a main radio channel, but designed and requested to be designed as operated in analog operation as opposed to digital operation, which all of our previous or our main channels were designed for. One of the key understandings, and this is something to kind of look at as you looked at the maps earlier, those maps indicate a digital operation of those primary channels, and I think there's There's still some discussion about operating those channels digitally or analog. And certainly, I think the equipment itself is capable of really either analog operation or digital operation with the matter of programming software. And so you could have a hybrid system where you had some of your channels, maybe your fire channels or EMS channels, analog, and your law enforcement digital. But what I would say is we've asked for digital operation. The maps we look at are digital, and a digital map is going to look better than that same equipment operating analog. And so we tend to lose a little bit of coverage footprint with images, and we do have some maps from vendors showing us, I think, some of those changes, but certainly that's a decision point that hasn't been completely, I think, decided as of yet. But the highway channels are proposed as analog operation, proposed as mobile only coverage, and so as you can see, both vendors chose to use quite a few less sites to provide mobile only coverage of the county. And then the next line items represent, or the last two line items represent some of the mutual aid base stations. And we've got some questions about the inclusion of those in the BACOM proposals that we need to work out. But certainly these are standalone. I think in the case of the Mark group heater, it's a standalone base. The other ones are control stations, so much smaller scale of radio system, and a lot of times worked out some, or changed or modified along the way sometimes. So this slide just representing some of the mobile radio equipment. Again, this is from our assessment, and gives kind of an understanding of the radio users, portables, mobiles, control stations. And this is what we use in the RFP to request the numbers. As we look at subscriber equipment in the responses, again, our budgets are based on the numbers, but this kind of becomes something that we'll tend to want to work out a little bit. But for the most part, the actual any subscriber budget is really just a budget until sometime into the process or into the contract where equipment is actually needed. But here you can see what the radio vendors chose to use. Again, BACOM being a Motorola dealer, you've got a couple of different Motorola APX subscriber options there, built around various tiered. Of course, we've got multi-band radios in there, but I think we were just kind of reaching for that in case there was any need. But obviously, those would be kind of top line subscriber equipment. High tier tends to identify law enforcement radios. A lot of times that's because they might have some encryption capabilities built into them, whereas the fire EMS radios, we use mid-tier to identify those not needing a couple of those features. And then low tier gives us the public works version radio equipment. And then, as you can see with GenCom, again, being a Harris dealer, they've used some of the higher tiered Harris products, but also have recommended a couple of Tate pieces of equipment for some of the mid-tier and low-tier offerings. Any questions? Okay, we'll couple more slides here. This slide here, again, I put this in here. It's what we're using right now. We're trying to, we've got some parallel work going on here. We're trying to make sure your budget processes are understood and being supported. So we put this together the other day. This is not anything. These are budgetary numbers as you look at them. Some more budgetary than others. The way I came up with the radio vendor totals is I've got five proposals. One of them's on the high end and really outside the realm of a lot of the others. One of them's on the low end, and again, probably way beyond maybe the support level that you wanna have to use. So I took those out of the equations, and the other three in the middle are kind of in a very close proximity to each other. Again, sometimes represent more equipment, less equipment, those kind of things. We really haven't vetted all that out yet, but took those together and averaged them. So when we look at the radio vendor system totals here, we have a pretty good budget number. Not a great budget number, but a good budget number based on what we think would be needed for a radio system. And this would be the actual radio vendor contract, and really kick off, signing this contract kicks off any real project. The next line item down there, professional services, is a potential consulting services if you needed my support throughout the project. Civil engineering services, we've taken an account of the tower sites and kind of an understanding of what engineering work would need to be done. And so we've got that budgetary line item there. Then we've got a civil vendors totals. Again, we've at least at this point taken a budgetary number and applied it towards an average estimate of the tower sites that we feel these three proposals are going to need to get a better budgetary number for civil vendors. But these costs won't be understood until probably well within a year of the project starting, and actually getting a response from a civil vendor and understanding what towers need to be built or what work needs to be done with generators and shelters and such. And then the final numbers or line item there is contingency funds. We tend to carry contingency funds for these projects, or recommend that you carry contingency funds. We don't know stuff, and we won't know stuff until we turn over some dirt or do all kinds of different things along the way. So we anticipate not having to have a project go over our budget, and so we recommend these contingency funds. And again, these are up for discussion with your financial folks, how to handle those. They may want to borrow against those. They may want to take on those risks themselves. That's certainly up to them. But when you look at this budget number today, this is, again, as we move forward in this process, we hope to refine this budget number, lock in some of this stuff, but some of these items will just have to remain budgetary until we get to those steps. And at the end, we track this throughout a process. We track the contingency money. We make sure we know if there's some change orders, what those requests are, how they're going to impact the budget, and those kind of things. But as you look at that number today, that's where we feel like the budget is today, about $7.5 million for the project. And this does not include operating costs, electricity at the sites, any of those things that are going to be needed down the road. But this is your budgetary or borrowing number as we see it right now. So the last slide here. So bear with me. I appreciate everybody going through this. This is, I put this slide in here because I feel like we have thrown some ideas at the radio vendors, and I don't think it's going to be fair for us to evaluate, and it's going to be very challenging to evaluate too many of these ideas with all the variables. We certainly can do that, but I think it may even be more helpful if we do that, understanding or having some of these decisions made. So of course, coverage is the big one here. It impacts everything else in the designs. So we had the projections for those those sites to meet the 95% request, the primary request. We have the two options. We have a 10 site design and a 13 site design. I think, again, we've got some additional work to do here, but when I look at the information so far, I don't see a major impact. And we know there's some questions, some of the communities, but I think your solution might be, with the cost savings version. And so we've got that projection of a couple of different designs with either 7 or 8 towers. That might be likely what you need to, or what you will need. And I think maybe the number's 8 in my mind right now, to get to a slightly reduced coverage level. So again, coverage area rather. And so certainly that gives you a potential 2 site cost savings over these designs. Much greater cost savings over the 13 site design. But yeah, that certainly can impact your budget by at least $1 million, if not more than that, quite a bit more than that, especially if you consider the life cycle of the system, which again, we are not necessarily looking at with our radio vendor contract itself. So I think coverage is a key area that I think the county wants to at least kind of settle on a feeling there, because that certainly can put us in a better understanding of what the solution is. Capacity, we've talked about that a little bit. I think that's a pretty easy decision. When I look at it right now, I think, when you just think about the number of channels, and again, you have a 2-channel system today, but I think if you look at it and say to yourself that it's probably less than $500,000 to add or drop a channel, kind of take that into consideration as you think about, what do we need a single law channel? Do we need 2 law channels and a fire and EMS channels? That's really an operational decision you folks want to make. Placing how you're going to use those channels in the response, and then we can really build off of that. And then we've often talked about this. I know we talked about it during the assessment. And it's very difficult to kind of give you a real good understanding right now, but I think we've got some pretty big differences between the 2 vendors. To be honest, when you look at the subscribers, it doesn't matter how you look at the subscribers across 5 different proposals. It's only 2 proposals, because both vendors are using the same subscriber costs and subscriber equipment, no matter which of the 5 proposals that you projected under. But right now, I've got some challenges because we've got some pretty big differences. I want to make sure we understand those differences and why they're there. But you have some potential differences in the cost of a public safety radio device. And so as you can see there, with between $2,500 and $4,500, I'd like to have that a little more better understood. But certainly, whether you purchase the equipment, I think in the contract or individually, I know is a big discussion piece. So I threw in there, right now, I think the budget for subscriber equipment is about $1.7 million. So certainly there's some more work to be done there, so that get you folks the answers to make that decision. I've heard talk about various, and I think I've heard talk about various grants opportunities, and sometimes that's very difficult when you purchase it in the contract, because you make the commitment when you sign the contract, or you likely make this commitment when you sign the contract with the vendor. And then, how that plays out over the course of the project, it can be dependent on what you agree to up front. But sometimes very challenging to go back later on and try and get that in a grant an individual grant, agency grant or something. So I think there's some decisions there to be made with subscriber equipment. And then again, as we talked on the previous slide, right now we're tracking a project budget of about $7.5 million. So hopefully I've left a little bit of time and provided enough information. Questions or comments?
Mike, this is Bob again. So the Greenfield Tower sites, to build the towers, that is not calculated into this, in your budgetary numbers? Or is that, I saw some engineering costs. I wasn't sure if that was for tower construction or just the engineering of the towers.
So the challenge, two things there with civils. Yeah, normally when we do evaluations, each site will have an evaluation based on whether, or a financial consideration based on whether or not it's a lease site or it's a construction site or a greenfield site. And usually those you know, we use one number for lease, we use one number to cost to build a tower. We really don't understand whether or not you would have to lease land as well. So, but that's kind of how we make the comparison of lease versus ownership. We run a lease over a 10-year period, so we kind of and we use those numbers in the evaluation process. Where we don't use those numbers is when we start talking about, we don't use the lease costs when we start talking about budgetary numbers, because we don't use lease or maintenance or anything like that, because ultimately when you sign a contract or when you later on get a civil vendor, they're not going to have anything to do with those lease numbers. So it kind of depends on what you're talking about, but yeah, we try and evaluate the costs of operating the system and building the system on one hand. On the other hand, when we get to budgets and talking about budgetary number for a project, those lease costs are usually left out.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Is the professional services total of 500,000 involved in this? Because I know you said if you stayed on as the project supervisor, are you going to be on for the entirety of this project, or is the county going to take it over at some point?
Normally, yeah, normally a contract, we would have a contract throughout the process. Certainly, that's what we would probably propose to you.
Good, thank you.
Okay.
So user groups, having seen some, I didn't realize it's kind of flashed up there, but having seen the coverage, and do you have questions at all on any of that? Any concerns? Yeah, just make sure we're talking through the owl, so just make sure you speak loud.
Right. On all your maps, Viola has poor coverage, at least less than 95% on all 6 of your maps I've looked at. Not acceptable, in my opinion, nor is it of the EMS and fire chiefs of Viola. If we could work on that, please.
Yeah, we certainly had talked about that a little bit. We think that two things here. Again, I kind of capture these, but you're right here, looking at indoor coverage in Viola. GenCom, this vendor, shows some very challenging results there in that area. Motorola and Baycom in this case tend to always stop their coverage modeling at the borders we place on them. So I think our first maybe one of our questions is to ask them to come out here or to give us some specific coverage understandings, and both in building and on the street coverage in those areas with these designs. But I think at this point, that's probably, at least the clarification we can get. But I also want to make the point that I think we feel that both of these both of these vendors are using the same tower location in that part of the county. And so we're ultimately probably going to get a very similar coverage footprints from them. But I think as I look at these maps, yes, and understanding the need up there,
They have
certainly,
a large tower on Bancom. They've suggested another tower up there. If you look at the top,
yes.
Bancom had another tower.
Yes, on their 13 site design, this one here is a receive only site. So certainly they were trying to provide some portable talk in capabilities up there, and that's certainly one understanding of how that design supports that area. But ultimately too, when we get down to transmit and receive, we're coming off the same tower. But I think in my mind, a solution, if you did not have a site up here, or is to move this site further up towards the Viola direction.
And I guess that leads me to the next question, the Ash Ridge site. Do you know, Mike, have they done studies on these existing towers that they know for certain they can take more equipment? Because the Ash Ridge site, I was told, could not do that.
No. Again, these are paper designs. They've done some visual inspections. But we certainly, the process that unfolds in one of these projects is to settle on a design. And again, whatever investigation we need to do to give you guys the comfort level to move forward, we'll try and do. But certainly that's a lot more of inspections or discussions at this point, because ultimately, in order to really understand the capabilities of the tower, you have to have engineering studies done, and those engineering studies take time and costs. And so we at this point we have paper designs, we have understandings, we can vet that out as much as we need to. But we at some point have to agree that this is the best path forward, and then we take that and sign the contract with the radio vendor. Hopefully we get the number of sites right, because that's important, because obviously if we start to need more sites, that adds cost to the project. But hopefully we get the number of sites right. We keep that number of sites either at the number we start with, or we have had projects where we reduce sites. Because maybe we built a Greenfield site where we thought we would lease a couple of towers or something. But we move forward, and the radio vendor and we would work together over a course of about 3 to 6 months. 6 months is probably long, but we really try and further vet an understanding of the tower owners' agreement for us to use the site, and the ability for us to site equipment on the site. But even at that point, that detailed design, that just kind of locks us into this is the direction we're going to go, and the radio vendor is going to start ordering equipment. But at that point, we may not have all the complete understandings of the civil engineer, because you want to do as much as you can before you hire a civil engineer. Because again, once they engineer a tower, whether you use it or not, you have to pay them for their services. And so if something falls apart, you have to go have them engineer the next tower. And so we try and do it in a very methodical step forward. But we certainly want to, like I said, answer as many questions as we can along the way, and give you guys the comfort level. But there is some risks with these projects until you start to really lock things in. We had a tower over in Greene County that was just within the conical airspace of a grass runway, and it ultimately forced us, a year into the project to accept the FAA's limit on the height of our tower. We were fortunate enough, the radio vendor went back, looked at things. We could use the site and it would still keep us within our coverage footprint. We obviously had some losses, but we felt those losses were outside of the county a little bit. So we moved forward. But those are the kind of things that can pop up even a year into a project.
So Mike, couldn't they just make a phone call to whoever owns the tower and just simply ask? Or will you allow us to even look at it? Because otherwise, why would we want a civil engineer to go and ask them that? I don't understand why they couldn't have made the phone call for this proposal. Because if that tower is gone, that's a problem. And that means we'd be building a tower, which totally changes these proposals. So I don't understand why we don't know, why we couldn't just make a phone call to whoever owns that tower and ask, is there any possibility we could be at whatever level?
Right. Right. There's a certain, and I'm not gonna say that the vendors haven't done that. I mean, I certainly think we could get some clarification. I think they have an understanding of some of these vendors, the M3 folks. Maybe they've had relationships in other counties where they've worked with them. But one of the challenges you sometimes run into, especially with older towers, is they might not even have the most accurate engineering understanding of the tower. So yes, you certainly could. We could even try and pursue some better understandings of the sites, depending on what kind of time we have in this process. But ultimately there's a little bit of risk, and I want to make sure that you understand that going forward that there's always risk, and we want to try and limit it, but we're going to have some.
So can we, when we're asking questions of the vendors to clarify other points, can you simply ask them if they have contacted any of these existing tower sites to just verify that they're at least a possibility pending a civil examination?
Yeah, I think my question would be to have them write a paragraph about how they vetted out the tower sites. And I
Thank
think
you.
We've got some of that information in there, but yep, I'll add that.
Anybody else have questions? I'll add one thing. So let's just say it out loud, what's the cost of that 13 tower project?
$10 million.
Okay, so just so everyone in the room knows. As much as that.
11.
What?
Grant County's 11 tower system they're building is 11 million, so it's cheaper.
It is, but we're a much different county financially speaking than Grant, so I think we just need to have our expectations and be somewhat realistic. Did you have a question, Ted?
I'll be quiet after this one, maybe. Two things. Number one, if you're looking at the difference in towers, I don't know where it's at, but I know there was talk a while ago, maybe narrow banding again someday in the next 20 years. We better be building this somewhat thinking of that future, because I doubt Richland County is going to put this money out again in 20 more years, within the 20 years. So make sure you have enough towers. Second thing is, and Mike, you can hopefully answer this, but the IFERN especially, but the mutual aid channels, I see nowhere where there's any inclusion in this project to make them work. Because at current, unless you're a Richland Center, it's pretty worthless. I think there's no sense leaving a channel out that we as a county are trying to use a lot more.
Yeah, I think, we've got the mark in there. I think the IFERN that we had identified was just a simplex channel. Certainly we've had clients that, built in mutual aid channels based on what their neighbors were doing, into the system. Once you bring a channel into the network, which is key, then you can kind of do some patching at times with the radio consoles, which can be helpful. Especially, let's say you move forward here and you identify one of your channels as a secondary or an additional operational channel, tactical channel, I guess is sometimes what they're called. Then you can use that to patch. So, you can get some features that you may not have had at your disposal in the past, to give yourself a better mutual aid. So really understanding maybe those instances that you've ran into where, gosh, it would have been better if we'd have had this capability. We certainly can get that into the design. We can throw something in the budget for now to make sure that there is support of that, even if we don't have a specific cost from the radio vendor. But I think we understand some of those things. And again, likely a tens of thousands of dollar cost thing as opposed to, a $500,000 change order or something. So as long as we make sure we don't run into anything like that, we should be pretty good at, with the safe budget number, taking those into account, which is one of the things we're ultimately going to have to do, likely with this budget and the door control, door access challenge we have at the dispatch center, at the law enforcement center, because the current radio console system operates those jail doors, and it's just not a main function of these new consoles. And so we know we have to separate those two out likely with this project. And so we'll have some type of budgetary consideration in there.
I guess just to clarify, the IFRN especially is not necessarily an option channel. It's a state program that we're all using, every county. And I'm pretty certain that the fire chief and EMS chief in the room would agree with me that in the Northeast, it can't be used. And if we're using it like we have been with Grant County, it's a very necessary channel as much as the rest. That's just my comment.
And so I guess I would have a question to follow up with that is what would the cost be to add that to a couple sites? Like, instead of just having it at Richland site, what would the cost be to add it to a few sites? Would there be a significant cost increase in that, or would it be minor?
Or could it be one of the extra channels too, that's already being budget looked at?
Well, I think it would be a minor cost, but I guess we want to make sure we understand the need there, as far as, what we're trying to accomplish. I assume, any channel we can add channels at various sites. I mean, we could have, once we're on a network here, we install a channel at a location, and that essentially brings the channel into the PSAP or the dispatch consoles. So it gives them access to a channel, and it gives them access to a coverage area. So let's say we install an IFRN channel down in the southwest corner of the county on the whatever towers at that location. That gives them that coverage area, and the operation of that channel in that coverage area. So, but then again, the second piece of that in making a decision on how to, or what to use or what to need is it gives them also the ability to patch that. Say, for instance, if they all of a sudden want agencies that are up in the northeast part of the county to be able to understand what's going on down there.
So part of that was called out, like highway going on 3 sites, and I think Jen comment called part of that out where it was going to be on multiple locations. I guess one of the questions back to Bay was to get that verification on both sites. Both are listed, and you're just not called out specifically.
Other questions?
So I from county wires, I know goes into this.
I know it's very specifically asked for initially, like I say, it's just not called out very specific actors.
I mean, statewide, you call a strike team out of Dane County, they're expecting to come in on either. Call a team from Ashland, they expect to be an Iver, so I mean, it's not a regional thing.
That's iFern 1.
Correct.
Okay.
What does IFRS stand for?
I don't know if anybody's out.
You know what the acronym stands for? I would
Interagency,
Yeah.
frequency for
Emergency response.
emergency communication.
Usually,
Usually. Mavis.
So Mike, just to follow up on one of the points that Chad brought up, as far as the ability of this system to adjust to changes in how we communicate, and he mentioned narrowband. What are your thoughts on the life of this system as we're setting it up?
Well, certainly the narrow banding piece, I mean, it's not something that if the FCC makes the mandate, since you're moving to digital operation, certainly the narrow banding step, I think we discussed a little bit earlier on the earlier call about phase 1 and phase 2. Essentially phase 2 is a narrow banding process. So likely if you build the system P25 conventional and the FCC makes any type of narrow banding requirement, it's probably going to be the vendor's responsibility to get you to a phase 2 operation, because that's really how you narrow band the operation of the frequency itself by using having 2 talk paths on one frequency. It's really an efficiency improvement on the spectrum. So I think you're not going to see anything impact your system that doesn't get accomplished by the vendor of the system itself.
Mike, you might have covered this already, but when you get to my age, your attention span starts to shorten, so.
You're the baby
And the youngest one in the
So keep
room.
that in mind as you age, but, the maps up here, the green represents 95% coverage, 95% of the time. As far as the red and the yellows, do we know what coverage that is, or is that just we know it's not 95%, but we don't know what the minimum is? I guess, is there clarification on to what level the reds and the yellows are on the GenCom side?
They do call that out in their response document. I haven't looked into the adjustment or what the actual color code is. So I will do that. But yes, they do call that out, and normally we see just the good color or a bad color, and sometimes falling way outside of the signal level of the radio. But in their case, I'm not sure why they have used these. It looks to be almost 3 different colors, really, because I do see some gray up there, which I would think recommend or represents a complete lack of a subscriber piece of a subscriber equipment working. A lot of times they'll have the subscriber won't work, and one color will represent an area that's below the required level that you're looking for.
So Mike, when will you have a summary report available for us to look at I'm assuming you'll come up with something similar to what you've presented in your PowerPoint, but when will you be able to give that to us so we can kind of look at it and adjust?
So, I think there's a couple of steps here. I really would like to, I would like to hear some direction from the county on these questions. And again, these don't have to be, this is what we intend to do, but this is what we're, what we think is the path we want to take. But I think along with that, that's one step. Another piece that I think we need is an assembly of questions to the vendors. We usually provide these informal written questions, and we will need to give them time to, get responses, depending on how many questions and to the level of extra engineering or extra work that they have to do to get us that information. So that's a big piece as well that I think just provides a little more clarity for everybody. But ultimately, I think I've got the report itself, as you can see in some of these charts, just summarizing things. But it's kind of what I say is a draft version at this point until we reach some of these answers and we can make some further clarifications and recommendations. But ultimately, we have to do a scoring process, and scoring, will give us normally the vendor of choice that you want to pursue, and at that point, sometimes there's even some adjustments after that to really come to a contract agreement. But as far as time goes, I'd like to take as much time as I could, but I think you're likely looking at, and I hope we have this much time, a couple of weeks.
Yeah, and given my understanding of how the borrowing process is probably gonna go, yeah, and I don't think we should rush. I mean, I think we want to make sure that we
Yeah.
have a very good understanding of what our options are before so I don't want to rush you. So a couple weeks, I think, is a reasonable to read. How many pages are these reports? Like several hundred? Yeah.
Not the report.
Or I mean, their proposals, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Your RFP.
right, so I think just giving us this PowerPoint that you will have, because we need to have some information in front of us in order to be able to make
Yep.
some of these decision points. So if you just provide us with this PowerPoint, I think that probably will go a long way in us helping us have those discussions,
Okay.
unless anyone else feels differently.
And
Okay.
the other thing that I would say is, and I mean, I'm certainly providing some of the draft assessment document or evaluation document. And if you guys want to expand that group, but I would caution everybody that, you don't want to get even some of this information, again, it's pretty high level, but we don't want to get vendors involved in this discussion and trying to counteract anything that we're discussing without them really understanding the discussion. So I would caution everybody just to kind of keep this information within the county's control.
So what I believe will happen is that we will take this information you've given us tonight, and at our next LEJC meeting, we will have an in-depth discussion on trying to come up with answers to these and recommendations for these decision points is what I'm thinking will happen.
Okay.
And added questions we may have at
And-
that point?
Well, I think that if we leave tonight and we can think of questions, I think that we should start feeding those to Mike immediately, because the longer he has to answer those questions, I think, and then we could talk about those questions at the next LEJC meeting, which is, does anybody know the date? April,
April
Which, and just to add another little added fun, we may or may not be changing our committee structure, which means it's a whole.
It's April.
April 8th.
That'll be before the meeting anyway, before that restructure, won't it?
It would be.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, so,
So Mike, I have 3 questions. I think we talked about a couple of them. One is, Melissa brought up contacting the tower owners for some clarification.
Yep.
My second one we talked about briefly was that single spur to the PSAP. I think that should be included in that because that's a single point of failure that just doesn't make sense. And the other one is added improved coverage for both the Casanova and Viola area. And looking at the maps, those 2 corners are just showing not happy. And I think those are questions I would have for the vendors to give us better clarification and answers on.
Okay.
hold on, Darren's been waiting a long time. Your question?
Yeah, I guess just so that I'm clear, when we're looking at this slide that you have up right now, Mike, projections indicate minimum of 10 to 13 sites to meet the 95%. That's the portal at the hip.
Yes.
And we
Okay,
know
so-
that-
Well, what I'm saying with that statement up there is your vendors, these 2 vendors came back and that was their both of their designs, 110, 113 sites. So those 2 primary designs, I mean, even though we see some differences and we know there's differences in the other designs, but those were the only 2 designs that they provided that meet the RFP requirements that we asked for. So that's all I was trying to make with that statement there.
Okay, so with the average project cost of $7.4 million, that's going to get us 10 to 13 sites.
No.
So then we will, during this project, we're not worried about 95% anymore. Because that, I mean, generally 7 to 8 keep us in the building coverage of 90.
I mean, we are not considering any of them. We're considering all of them.
Sure.
It's just that the financial situation that we are currently sitting in the county is going to drive that conversation
I
regardless
just
of
know
how
I've
much
had a
we
lot of conversation, a lot of questions about 95 and 95, but realistically, what we probably can afford is going to be more of building coverage somewhere in the 90%. That's what it could be. I just
Exactly,
don't want anybody leaving here not understanding.
right. And that's accurate.
Or not, not realizing that, and there's a lot of focus spent on 95, 95.
We need to start subtracting off of those tower sites though, down to that 7 or 8. Asking that final one area, regularly, that's our biggest concern.
But I have some questions about, I know it's just on paper, but those aren't the best choices. I didn't see where, and maybe, I understand it's just on paper, but to me, on paper can affect the real deal.
Worse, right?
Have we talked to neighboring counties? I know local folks have talked to neighboring counties. And if you can get out of Viola and Lafarge, and in the map, the worst coverage area was actually Lafarge. Because Viola's down farther in the county. So, but Vernon County has tower sites too. We work with them, and I didn't see any of their sites on there. And I understand that other Vernon County entities can get into Viola and Lafarge and talk about on their portal. So I'm just curious how much that would change things up. But again, I know, I just hate that. I think Kent, you were kind of alluding to it. Take 2 of those tower sites off. What does that do to our bottom dollar? So,
Good points.
Other thing we had talked about, Mike, and I know we haven't had this discussion, this is probably not gonna be a popular thing for you to bring up, but Clay and I had talked about if we go digital, that's fine, but digital is pretty much either you have a signal or you don't. If you stay analog, you may get 3 out of 5 words out, but maybe those 3 out of 5 are enough to get the signal through to dispatch to let you know that you need help. Is that still a consideration? Would that significantly
Are you
affect the
talking,
coverage area?
you're talking about,
Analog system.
you're talking about buying equipment and going backwards with its capability.
I don't think you're necessarily talking that though, because I think the
You live in
equipment is,
analog channel out
the
there.
equipment's gonna be the same. It's just gonna be whether it's programmed analog or programmed digital.
Right, that would be my,
Right,
Yeah.
but you're still talking about buying the same equipment.
equipment.
But the subscriber equipment is what you're gonna say.
But I think now that, I think most of us, once we have an understanding that, I mean, I'm gonna use my own service, we have several portable radios that are not gonna be digital at all. But we have a lot of other radio equipment that is digital capable when you're talking about staying within the 12.5 or that, you know, when we have. So I wonder if we did a different inventory, how much that subscriber would affect us. All of us. I know some of us, I mean, I've got some portables that are not gonna work on that.
But you're keeping all the pagers on analog. Pretty much everything. That out of your end, it's pretty substantial.
Right, you're talking about portable and mobiles, that's what it comes down to. But my point being is, are we really gonna save that much money if you're talking about buying the equipment that will operate in the conventional digital realm of programming it to go backwards?
Right.
Versus if we take the next couple of years and remain open to conversation with all the subscribers, that gives all the subscribers opportunities to budget for radio replacement, look for grants for radio replacement, seek opportunities to do joint buying adventures on radio replacement, keeping that cost down. I don't know that you're gonna save a lot of money by turning on an analog system, because you still gotta buy the same equipment, you're working it backwards rather than working it forward.
You weren't actually, your point though wasn't about saving money, wasn't your point that with an analog system, at least you'd get a crackle, so you'd know something's going on. With the digital system, you get nothing. So I think she's actually not talking about saving money, she's talking about, is that a better thing for us, a better option but Mike, I thought you said that the projections on the coverage would drop if it was an analog system overall, is that, so our quality would be worse, but at least it would be worse in a way that people would know something's going on, but they don't know what's going on? I don't know. To me, I don't know that sounds
I think what you're
like a
gonna
good idea.
do is we're buying equipment. We have to make sure that even though we have a money crunch, the percentage of coverage stays up there so that you don't have those issues. You know, it's gonna be how it's put together. I see what Barb's saying though.
But it's hard to compare that when right now you're operating on 3 or 4 tower sites. If you have all those tower sites up,
We'd be doubling our tower sites.
Yeah.
With the 8 option.
Always important to keep in mind in these discussions is you're, no matter what you do, you're not gonna put in a system that's not gonna make it better than what you have today. So we're not looking at anything that's going to be anywhere close to not improving the coverage greatly. What the real decisions are is, you know, can you afford and do you want to make the investment to make sure that you've improved it so much that you know, you don't, as I think somebody said earlier, you know, we don't have to have these conversations in 10 or 15 years. But I think to the point about analog and digital, and I agree with the statement, yeah, you've got to be moving forward. So if you chose to put in the system today and operate channels or a channel in analog, it's probably because you're choosing to try and save the use of subscriber equipment and spend more money investing in the system. And then maybe there's a migration path for subscriber equipment or grants and stuff, get you your improvements so that ultimately someday you can turn all the channels to digital. So that's kind of how I would consider the analog digital discussion, but ultimately you're probably going digital. You know, that's just where, you know, public safety is headed, and the improvements you'll get off of digital, yeah, far outweigh trying to stay in the analog world. So again, you can operate it analog, but hopefully that's because you're trying to invest into in the infrastructure. And then when you turn it on digital, it gets you, it exceeds your expectations.
Anyone else?
Would it be of any value if we, and I know we work on both subscribers or not, but I'm gonna use myself as an example. Get a better understanding of phase one versus phase two, or conventional versus trunking, and knowing what I have, both for EMS and emergency management and radios that can do phase one and phase two. I wonder if all of us as subscribers could go back and maybe we would realize that we might have more radios than what we realized that could do that.
You mean that would be compatible with the new system, so you wouldn't have to buy subscriber equipment?
Or buy as much.
Yeah, I mean, that is a big piece of the conversation is how we as a county, we're still in discussions about whether we would pay for all the subscriber equipment or not.
Or whether it would be an inventory basis or, what's out there that's already being used.
Right.
I think that's right, though, there, it's just, I mean, I look at some of my oldest mobile radios in the fleet right now, and they at least say they're P25 capable. They may not have the firmware, but
I think if you stay in that play, your department would be good.
yeah,
And the fire department original center would for the most part be good. The city PD would be good. It's just gonna be a software update to get it going. So it is gonna be, I think, a worthy thing.
Then maybe we might find out that you have half of what you look for subscriber to go that other direction.
I mean, and if that's the case, then, we'd be
Now
more likely to be able to fund the other
I mean,
half.
ultimately, if you have a portable radio, you call, all you gotta do is have that make and model, you call your vendor. There's probably a list out there too, somewhere.
Like for me now, all my handhelds are switched. I won't, everything that's on that list for me is no longer. We got a grant this year, so all our handhelds are replaced. All our handhelds will work. Most of our portables are P25 as long as Motorola updates it.
Right, yeah, if we're not buying all the subscriber equipment, that could be another tower site.
There'd be programming costs or maybe some like that would have to be dealt with.
Like for me, I've got to do it in the next 5 years regardless, because Grant County's going digital.
Right.
So that's the other thing, if Richland County stays analog, then I have to have a frequency or whatever that I can talk to Richland County analog, Grant County digital.
So Grant County just updated their system,
They're in the
but,
works.
and they're analog. I thought they were staying analog.
No, they are going digital.
They are.
The sheriff's department is going digital first, and everybody else has 5 years to switch.
Okay, I was under the,
they
Understanding that.
went back and forth on it a little bit, yeah,
The
last I heard.
last meeting, it's
They've decided.
digital. They did all the looping, all that's done, and they don't even have all their tower sites done yet.
go ahead, Ted.
Okay. Just to bring out what we were talking about over here. For a radio like PD has, instead of buying a new $4,500 or $5,000 radio, it'll cost $1,000 to get the firmware update. Which makes sense. Now, just so you guys on the board understand too, that the talk that's all there abroad, and I kind of agree with, is if the county's gonna go digital for how many years, haven't we been able to make things work? They're gonna make me change all the radios in my department. That's just what's being
Of course,
said.
we're all taxpayers in Richland County, so that, my argument has always been, whether we tax it or you tax it, they're all the same people
But
getting
it's a
taxed.
budgetary thing.
It is, and for us having to get loans,
And-
yeah,
It's not easy.
definitely agree with that.
I still think FEMA grant's a great way to go. It took Tanner about 6 hours, a couple days here and there to get the grant wrote, and we got $78,000 done and paid for all my portables.
I think you just volunteered him, didn't you?
No, he volunteered himself.
For us, he'll write it for everyone.
Oh, I didn't say that, but he might.
He's
You
ambitious.
ask him, he might.
He's pretty energetic.
So the thought I would throw out here as far as subscribers and this RFP and contract processes is a lot of times, and these are mostly associated with the big radio systems that are bid on by the vendor manufacturers like Motorola or Harris specifically. They do give you a huge bulk discount on the system based on the subscribers that you purchase. But I think for both of these vendors that you're looking at, there's really there's no, decision that, or nothing tying the subscribers to the radio system here. So certainly, and this also, subscribers themselves are handled in so many different unique ways for various counties. Sometimes there's cost sharing, sometimes there's, a certain support level, and other times it's, the agencies are on their own, as you've kind of described with some of the other counties. But so certainly, we certainly could begin carving this up a little bit and trying to talk about just the system, but and even ultimately, you could even carve up contracts if you felt like the system piece needs to be separated from the subscriber piece. So keep that in mind, I guess.
I guess as a subscriber that has to budget, it'd be good to know coming up soon what the county's plan is, because up until this past year, I've been replacing our portables with G25 capable, but since this conversation has started, I have not purchased any radios because I have no idea. So I budget for it, but I'd like to know, should I continue on with my replacement plan, or are we getting across the board?
I think we'll have an answer for that at our April LAJC meeting. And I would, if we always have them on WebEx, so you can always listen in.
Right.
Or watch them later and then let us know with questions. But I think that's one of the talking points we'll be making a decision on at that meeting, so.
And I wouldn't want any agency that's in the process of switching out radios, because that's a safety issue for them, to stop switching out radios, hoping something's gonna happen. That doesn't make sense. I think you need to
We're
continue.
probably 2 years. before
Exactly, yeah, so-
implementation.
Right, we wouldn't be buying equipment till late in the process.
Please don't risk what you're doing,
Right.
radios, to not start doing and replacing what you need to do, so.
But making sure, but your point is you want to make sure you're buying something that will be compatible, so it
Correct.
doesn't have to immediately be replaced.
As long as it's P25, it should work.
If it's work backwards, if it's P25 phase 1, then that would work on a conventional system.
I mean, my point is we have our old analog radios that still work, but I've been slowly implementing with P25 capable because we all know what direction public safety is going.
Exactly.
So do I replace radios that still work for the sake of replacing them, or am I actually going to need to purchase them on my own, is my question.
We should
I
have an answer.
can build a couple into every budget year, heck, a lot easier than trying to do 16 at once.
Exactly. Good move.
And along with that, as you have that discussion, yeah, it's important to understand too, if you go with a vendor and the county buys the equipment, it's going to be hard to take advantage of maybe some of those agencies that have half of their equipment, with a certain vendor, because you don't want to be mixing these things. So I would say if you're gonna support agencies kind of keeping what they do with the vendor that they like and the piece of equipment that they like, the county's probably going to have to support that through some financial support level so that they can keep the same vendor. Otherwise, if you just tried to buy, say, half an agency's has half of their portables that need to be replaced, now all of a sudden you got two different flavors of maybe manufacturers and model equipment, and that doesn't work. You have to have at least a common piece of equipment for a department so everybody understands how to operate it.
Okay. Are we done? Anything else?
Today.
Right, yes, obviously
Mike, will
Question.
you email me the PowerPoint from today, please?
I sure will. And I was just gonna say, with your April 8th meeting, I think it's probably sooner than that, that we complete our question list. So I will begin a draft of a question list, probably by the end of this week. I will share something. And then we can kind of, add anything to that question. And I think at least get it off to the vendors. We can always ask them additional questions later, but give them time to at least start working on the first round of questions and give us some formal, we might have some formal responses before your April 8th meeting.
That would be great. All right. Anything else? How else going on? Any other questions that you have for Mike? All right. Well, thank you so much for your time, Mike. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
So will you be available to come to our April 4th meeting in case there's and to talk about the answers that you get from, did I say?
8th?
The 8th. Yeah, sorry, I thought it was the 8th. Will you
I
be?
will put it on my calendar and let Barb know for sure, but yes, I will plan on it.
Thank you.
You bet.
All right, so with that, I would, item number 5 is adjournment. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All those in favor? Aye. All right, thank you, everyone.
Hey, make it work.
Right.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
I feel like every time we talk about it, it's